Hello and welcome to another episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of SAGA, the Small Agency Growth Alliance, and I am delighted to have with me none other than the regular panelist, Lima Nightmare. Welcome to the show, Lima.
I love the new nickname. And Lima Nightmare, by the way, you just told me to behave myself while the mic was hot. The last time someone told me to do that, it didn't go well.
Yeah. Actually, your real name is Lee McKnight Jr. for any listener who has not caught you on the show before. You were with RSWUS. And why don't you give a brief overview? Actually, before you do that, let me explain the Lima Nightmare thing, because probably most people have no idea where that comes from.
What's going on, yeah.
We use an automated transcription service for this show, and on a recent episode that you appeared on, it decided that Lee McKnight was Lima Nightmare. And so I've just decided that should be your nickname going forward, so we're having some fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, I play out with some guys in a couple of bands, but if I go solo, which everyone's waiting for, it's Lima Nightmare for sure.
Absolutely. We're all waiting for that.
The world is waiting, obviously. Yeah.
So who are you really, and what do you do when you're not fantasizing about being a solo act?
Yes, Lee McKnight Jr. I'm the VP of Sales at RSWUS. We're based out of Cincinnati, and we are an outsourced business development firm. We solely work with agencies, and that does include not the traditional agencies, but things like PR, right? Different animal, digital, and small to mid-sized firms are really our sweet spot. And so we're out there to get in at the top of the funnel with a good qualified meeting. And then the key is getting clients closer to close. So it's taking them a little further down the path, helping them nurture leads where it makes sense, to ultimately have them win more business.
And you generously create a lot of free content on the subject, obviously on shows like this, but you also have your own YouTube channel at RSWUS where you create the My Three Things or the
three takeaways.
Three takeaways. I knew it was three things, but I couldn't remember. Yeah, three something. It's three useful bits of advice. It is worthwhile to subscribe to. And so you're very generously creating content, and that is a perfect segue into what we want to talk about today, which is the content that agencies create and how agencies can be smarter about what they're creating and how they're using it.
Yeah, and I always do this at the end. I want to get the prop out of the way now.
Oh boy.
So there's Battlestar Galactica 80s action figure. Nice. That's a Cylon. Love it.
That is definitely my era, so I appreciate that. When we can do things that I can relate to, and I don't have to sit there and say what are you talking about, like I do with my kids all the time.
Now that as you should, my kids the same. So now that I've derailed this entire thing, So what I threw out, as a topic potential today, when you talk about agencies and creating content, there were a couple of pieces to it. Specifically, where I threw that out was I had a conversation with an agency principal last week, and I always like to ask the question when I'm prospecting. My prospects are agency owners, partners, to try to bring them on board. So I'm talking to agencies every day, and I'll always ask that upfront questions around how have you been handling new business? I mean, why are you talking to me today? What's the challenges in terms of are there particular hurdles? And normally there are 3 or 4 that I can expect. And one I hadn't heard in a while, but that was just interesting, was the fact that this particular agency, and I would agree, they were doing a solid job creating content, whether that was they had a really good blog, nice presence on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and especially on LinkedIn. The principal was doing a particularly good job, and they were B2B focused, mostly industrial, which is not always the sexiest topic, right? But he had done a really great job of, in 3 or 4 really succinct, 3 times a day, which is tough to do and do well, thought leadership driven. I'm like, man, that would be, love to have you as a client, because we would want to totally take advantage of that. He said, well, it's nice to hear you say that, whether we work together or not, because the individual that we just unfortunately had to let go in the new business position was using none of it. And it was laid out on a platter for that person, in, if nothing else, in these 3 and 4 little, if you will, kind of sound bites. They were written, of course, but that were so personable, but at the same time spoke to their expertise. And anyone in that industrial sector or B2B that a prospect of theirs, a marketer that would see that, they're like, oh God, yeah, they get it. They're speaking my language multiple times a day. And it blew me away that And to be fair, maybe they weren't trained up. I'm not sure what all the background was on this person. It's a tough hire. We all know that. We've talked about that here many times. But that was just that story I wanted to bring up today, because it just blew me away that you wouldn't just see this amazing jewel or jewels that you have. Prospecting's hard enough. It's staring you in the face and you're not even using it. And the agency and the folks there working hard to produce that content, and this individual's not even touching it. It was crazy.
Right. Yeah, and it's, I mean, we've talked previously on this show and elsewhere about the importance of building relationships with your prospects when you're doing agency business development. It's not a spray and pray approach. It's not just a volume game. It's actually building relationships, and content is one of the best ways that you can not only create the relationship in the first place by introducing them to you, but it's also a great way of nurturing them through the process and addressing their pain points, their concerns, maybe their questions that they may have about how you work or what you do. And so agencies, it behooves them to get smarter about the content they're creating and how they're using it. Because too often, like you, I've seen agencies that are creating content and not using it. They are creating content that doesn't really have a particular value. They're doing it either for vanity or because they enjoy creating it, but they're not really thinking about where it fits in the business development process or the client retention process, or however they're going to use it. And so you need to be smart about those things, because particularly for small agencies, the bread and butter of the listenership of this show, you just don't have the resources to squander. You can't just create stuff that goes and sits out there and never gets utilized. So you need to think about that from the part of the time where you're thinking about what to create all the way on through to how you're leveraging that with your prospects and clients.
Yeah, excellent point. And I think to take it a step further, what's interesting, and I've been guilty of this myself. I mean, and thank you, we at RSW create a lot of content, as do you. I don't know how many series you have or how you sleep, but
I don't.
It's pretty cool. You do a lot. Yeah, just a plug for Chip. You're not seeing other besides this, all the other things he's doing. You should. I mean, it's valuable content. And as I said, I've been kind of guilty myself of, I'll have, like we're doing this right now. It's called Tune Up. It's a one-page visual guides, kind of like infographics, but not quite as detailed as some infographics can be. It's more like a checklist, if you will. And we're doing a whole series of 7 of those. I posted one of those last week, and it's within each one of those are 4 takeaways, essentially. And I'm racking my brain like, all right, I need to post something good. And I'm like, I only posted that whole thing once. There's 4 other ways I could post that. That's not retreading. I mean, there's that one takeaway. That's valuable. An agency who might be just scanning LinkedIn, that might be following me, that's going to resonate. And it's like, what are you doing, dummy? And I think just like, agencies, you're close to it. You don't always take a step back and think about, I didn't coin it, but it's that I love it though. It's whenever you create a piece of content, use it at least 5 different ways, because that individual that you think might have seen that, they didn't see it. I mean, don't be afraid. And you don't post the exact, or even sometimes you can post the same exact thing 2 days later, if you will. But I think it's another thing agencies maybe don't always think about is once you've created that, don't just use it one time and push it out and think, why aren't people breaking my door down? Make it easier on yourself after you've done the hard work of content creation.
Yeah, I think it's important for you to think through how can you take that piece of content and not only be repetitive with it, reuse it, repurpose it, but also how do you put it into different forms of media, right? So if you've got an infographic, turn it into a LinkedIn post, turn it into a blog post, use that same information in a video or in a podcast, because different people consume your content in different places and in different ways. And maybe at different times of the sales cycle. And so the more ways that you can leverage that single piece of research that you've done or the effort you've put into creating the content, the better. So, think about it from those standpoints. And it's the same kind of thing that agencies are thinking about for their clients and the work they're doing for clients. But too often the agencies don't look inward and say, okay, how can I apply these same lessons, strategies, and expertise to ourselves?
Oh my God. Totally. And I so many times, excuse me, I know you've seen it too, and talking to agencies yourself, they don't apply those same principles. And I get it with their own client work. Again, whether you want to call it the cobbler's children, which is from the 1600s, I thought about people like agencies will still sometimes say that to me. Like, well, we're just like the cobbler's children. I think there's too many now. They're like, what are you talking about? Like,
right. What's a cobbler?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, we need to maybe get an updated version of that proverb or fable, whatever it properly is. But it's because they're always head down, and because they're busy and they have to be. Clients do come first. They're not always not only are they not thinking about what they're doing for their own clients and how they could apply it to themselves, but I think also in terms of agencies are constantly talking to me about but they mention quite a bit. Like you talk about content, how we need to do it. What do we? And this is age old. What do we do? What's going to be interesting to these marketers? I mean, they don't care. I'm like, no, they do, in the sense of, if you can show that you can help them to make it very basic. I mean, I think we've dropped this before when we've talked on our reports. Marketers this year, it was like 73% of marketers say we read agency content, and we predominantly read it on LinkedIn. And it's like, you got to take advantage of that. But it's all, you can always go back as an agency with that content creation to, how do you help your clients, period? And think about that, because you're living that every day. You just never think about the fact that you could turn that into content, not things that are protected, or, you're not sharing hard figures or things like that.
Sure.
But man, that's just a gold mine, and it so well. Tap into that, because that's just going to relate so much better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your best source of content ideas are the conversations you're already having with prospects and clients. So totally. If something's coming up over and over again, you probably ought to have a piece of content that speaks to that.
Right.
So that, instead of writing the same email, to a prospect answering a question over and over again, you can steer them to a piece of content where you explain how you do things, or your point of view on something, or why you like this tactic and not that one, or whatever it is. Yeah. And start thinking through those things. And a lot of it doesn't have to be fancy. I think this gets a lot of agencies hung up. And I'm glad you mentioned infographics a few moments ago, because I remember when infographics first sort of started to take hold about a decade or so ago, and people just, it became this sort of arms race to create, the fanciest, most complex infographics. And so, I see infographics that are effectively like 2 pages long of normal 8.5 by 11 text, and it's just all crammed in, and it's visually very appealing, but there's so much stuff you don't really even know what's going on, and you're not really taking advantage of the format. Yeah. It doesn't need to be that complicated, and I see a lot of agency effort wasted on making something just right. And part of that's because the agency world wants to make sure they're putting their best foot forward. And so they're thinking, geez, if I'm going to put out an infographic, it's got to look tremendously visually appealing. The research has got to be spot on. If I'm doing a case study, it's got to be super detailed, and I got to have these interviews, and I got to have, imagery and quotes and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't need to be nearly as complex as you think it does. Yeah. Most people aren't paying attention to that level of detail, and they want the as you say, the key takeaways that you can leverage. And so focus on that first and foremost, and you can create more useful content more frequently than if you're trying to create, pixel perfect, research perfect, everything every time.
Yeah, we need some kind of a billboard that you and I are now going to procure, and on it for every agency that drives by this mythical highway that we're on. But really, keeping it simple. Right before we jumped on, we were talking about case studies. We were guilty of that. And if you went to our site right now, hint, hint, shameless plug, you actually...
And where is that website, Lima?
I guess it's rswus.com. I don't know. I think it is.
Maybe.
But in all sincerity, we were spending a lot of time on case studies, and they look really good. Our designer is fantastic, folks in our ops, and having said that, when people go to our site, they're hitting where you think they would, the homepage, and we have a hub about our programs and a lot of content, and they're going to those 3 places. How often they just on their own are going to our case study page? Maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but they're not. Now, when I prospect and I drive them to it, or they ask me, and I do bring it up because I want them to see, then absolutely, then they're clicking and they're going to those links, and that's great. But to your point, some of those that are on there now, okay, it looks pretty, it looks nice. I'm not going to get through all this. How did you help that person, and what was the result? So we are in the process of totally changing it, where we've got tiles, and we didn't create this. I mean, a lot of other folks, agency world or not, do it in this way. but where it's just, here's our client, here's what type of firm they are, here's the client, that the business they won, here's what type of, in their vertical type of company, and here was the number, here was ultimately, what the value was to them as far as the result. And now we can send that. We'll have 12 of those blocks at any given time, and we don't have to peruse through 15 paragraphs of all this, because so
right.
I think
and it holds back a lot of agencies from creating case studies that might actually be useful to them, because they sit there and they think, oh my God, it's going to take me so much time. I've got to set up interviews with the client and all that. Most of the time you can do case studies pretty effectively with just what you already know off the top of your head, and you just sit down and and put it into an easy to digest format. In some cases, you may not even need case studies, right? I mean, if you're in your conversations with prospects, case studies aren't going to move the ball forward, don't even bother with them. You've got to know how your process is working with your prospects and create the content that's right for them, not looking at what some other agency is doing or what one of us gurus says, on YouTube or LinkedIn. You need to figure out what works for you and your client base.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I lean towards agencies always having, even if it's in their back pocket, some form of case study that can help back up the expertise.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point though, that doesn't mean that there needs to be, and I'm sure you've seen it too, right? They have like 25 case studies. It's like, I don't even know why. What are you doing there? And you're killing yourself. And that's probably not really helping SEO either, depending on how you have it set up. So I think it's just, obviously it's being smarter about it, but it is about showing the expertise. And if a long form case study doesn't do that, then stop doing them in that way, at least. So it's interesting, but we certainly walk our own walk is what we're doing now. So right. And we're usually pretty good about that, but case studies has always been like, what's the best way to do this? And it's frustrating, or it can be. And I think to your point, you've got to make it simple and repeatable, and have maybe a template. Maybe it's not a formal template, but if you don't have a way that you can do it effectively but simply, then you're never going to do any of them, because it's just like, this takes so long. I don't have time for this. And then it's 3 years later and you have a great story and like you never told it.
Right. And at the same time, obviously there's a lot of content that you're probably creating or thinking about creating that's not case studies. And in those cases, sure, you really should turn to those conversations that you're having with your clients and prospects and use it as an opportunity to address whatever concerns or objections they may have, or answer the questions that they may have. And one of my favorite things is, when I'm talking with a prospect or a client who'll say, I talked to you about this, and then I saw you wrote an article about it, or you had it as a subject on your podcast or on the videos. I'm like, because that's where the ideas come from. Right. I want to address the questions that I'm actually getting. I don't want to sit down and just make up what maybe is on my mind, because who knows? My mind's a scary place, I'll tell you that. And so I'd rather be in the minds of my clients and prospects and taking advantage of their questions and concerns rather than my own.
Yeah, every single prospect conversation I have, I've got my notebook out. Part of it just to make sure I'm taking notes in case they're throwing out things that might be important to follow up. But the other is to your point, I almost always get some kind of idea for a blog post or a video from something that they've said, and you would think it's like they probably all just kind of say a lot of the same things, and some kind of do, because the problems tend to be similar. But no, every time I get something cool where and I will say, I'm going to steal that from you, by the way. I'll give you credit if you want. They're like, no, you can have it. And so it's really good. And it's like, because you're not the only one going through this, or and they're not. So it's
right. And that's a great point. I've created a one-page note form that I use for all of my client calls and prospect calls. And it, the body of it is really just a 2-column note-taking thing. It's pretty standard. But at the bottom, I have 2 small boxes. One is for to-dos or follow-ups, but the other one is labeled ideas. And it's ideas that come out of it either for a topic or a service or a workshop or something that came out of that conversation. And almost every single meeting, I've got at least one, and often more than one thing in that box that I can then leverage, for future content or other purposes.
I love that. You're like formalizing the process. That's great. Yeah. And
Well, I needed some structure because my handwriting sucks. And, I used to just use, my notebooks and just write things, and I'd be flipping through and be like, what is this? And so now I created about 6 months ago, just a standard form, and it's got, name and date of who I'm talking to, cool. An agenda, and it really helps keep me much more organized. And particularly for my regular client coaching calls, it allows me to more easily refer back and review the last couple every time we talk, so I can refresh my recollection, because I'm getting old, Lee, and my brain is just not what it used to be.
Well, agencies watching now or in the future, take note. I mean, this is a fantastic takeaway. I mean, to formalize that process, especially as you said, 2 or 3 months later, maybe. My handwriting is also terrible. I can read it well enough, after the fact, but yeah, 3 months later,
right.
That looks like an alien symbol. I'm not even sure what that was, but yeah. So I like that a lot, actually. It's cool.
Yeah, and so I think if we're thinking about how we're creating the content, now we have to think about how we're delivering it. And so I know one of the things we were talking about in the pre-show is one of the challenges that agencies have, particularly when they have an internal or external resource who is feeling pressure to create activity of some kind. They often resort to spray and pray emails, and let's just put everybody on blast and get whatever content we have out there, or a request for a meeting or whatever. And that then has some potential negative impacts.
It does. And I definitely wanted to bring that up, because I'd be interested. We talk to our clients about it, and specifically email deliverability and your sender reputation. Now, I'm certainly not going to tell anyone here that I'm an expert as we go into the technical details of how to do it. If you just Google it, there's tons of information. Thankfully, on our end, we have folks in our Marcom and our operations department who are pretty deep into it. But what ultimately, for folks, if you're not aware of this at this point, and I would think a lot of them, maybe you are, but there's some. I mean, I just really started delving into it myself. Like, tell me more of what you guys are doing over here. That if you are specifically, to your point, Chip, blasting out, which a lot of not only salespeople tend to default to, but you have, and again, I'm not knocking any competitors, but lead gen firms, not even in the agency space, but just, this is what we do. And they'll tell you, I mean, we are an email, that's how we're getting these meetings. That's our main focus. And what that typically probably means is they're blasting those out. So if Google, and I'm really making this very basic, but if Google is seeing that what you're sending is effectively going into too many spam folders, it's setting off some of those Google alarms. But you can get into a bad sender reputation, and it can really hurt your email efforts to where they're not getting your emails anymore because you effectively been blasted. And you can get out of that, but it is tough. And so agencies also, especially small agencies, mid-sized agencies, when they do make an internal hire at new business, bless them, but because they're so busy, the reason they hired that person in the first place, a lot of times they're not keeping up like they should, or they're not having the visibility of these folks, especially if it's someone that they feel like, I don't need to, they're good, that they've been doing this for a while. And that all may be true. But if you aren't 100% sure the tools that they're using, and if they are just blasting out, because especially after COVID, right? I mean, it changed so many things, but specifically the business development, it's like, okay, people are at home. Does the phone not really work anymore? We talked about a little bit of this in the past. But what you tend to do is, right, well, I know they're on email, of course, because that's what they're doing. So maybe mail, physical mail, might not be working. Maybe the phone might not be working, which, by the way, they both still are very much so. But it's so now we're just at email, and you're finding that are you even sure that they're getting through? So you can Google, and there are tools, and Google has a specific tool, that Postmaster tool, that will help you with the sender reputation. And sometimes you feel like Google's just pulling all our strings. We're all their puppets, but it is a thing.
Yeah. And the other problem you have is if you damage your sender reputation, it doesn't just impact your ability to do these blast emails. It can impact your ability to just send one-to-one emails to your own actual clients.
Sure.
I have worked with some agencies that used this tactic of just blasting stuff out, and I had a hard time receiving their individual one-to-one emails where we were actually doing work together. because their email domain had such a poor reputation from a technical perspective. But even if you set aside the technical stuff and you figured, okay, well, here's how I can get around that or work within the systems that Google or LinkedIn or all these folks have, you have your own actual reputation as a firm, as an agency.
Such a good point.
That you're damaging. And I got to tell you, my inbox is filled day in and day out, both my email inbox and my LinkedIn inbox, with agencies pitching me absolutely irrelevant nonsense services that have no impact on the work that I do. They didn't spend even 5 seconds to look at my website. In some cases, many listeners may know that I rebranded as the Small Agency Growth Alliance about 1.5 years ago. I still get people who are reaching out from agencies calling it Agency Leadership Advisors, and they love the work that Agency Leadership Advisors is doing. Well, you haven't paid any attention because it hasn't been named that in 1.5 years. So don't tell me that you looked and you saw and it was great. Don't pitch me to be on a podcast where I don't have guests.
Yeah.
One of the podcasts I do is a weekly podcast with Ginny Dietrich of Spin Sucks.
Right.
We've been doing it for 4 years now. We have had not one single guest. I get pitched every single week for guests. In fact, I got one just before we got on the show. An agency reached out and said, I loved your episode on this. So kudos to them for actually finding an episode.
Yeah.
I'd like to pitch, my client as someone who can continue that conversation. Cool. Where? Not on this show because we've never had a guest.
Maybe they want to be the first one. Did they mention that?
No, look, I would give them at least some props if they said, I know you never have guests, but I wonder if you might consider it.
Yeah, at least they know that.
Because at least they're then signaling that they know, but most of this stuff is not that way. And LinkedIn really has just become, a garbage pit of people reaching out with, nonsense connection requests or in-mail or those kinds of things. Stop it. Stop it. You don't. And here's the thing. Agencies do not need lots and lots of new clients. They need a handful every year of good quality clients, assuming they've got good retention of their existing clients. You don't need huge volume. So don't look to send out to 5,000 or even 500 people. If you've got 50 people that you're targeting for meaningful conversations, real relationships, you'll be in much better shape and you won't run into any of these problems of deliverability. You won't be creating useless content. You won't be wasting tons and tons of time on pointless phone calls or Zoom calls or emails.
Yeah, I that's great because it's it's interesting when I always make sure if I'm in a conversation with an agency, they're considering us, I want to get out fairly quickly just what their expectations are on volume. And if and bless them, but if I hear from them that, what I'm really kind of looking for is like 10 to 20 meetings a week. And I've heard numbers kind of like that. We're getting our clients 2 to 3 meetings a month because we are targeting as specifically as we can the right type of clients. And that can be a work in progress. But I will turn around and say, well, first of all, I don't want to waste your time. We probably shouldn't keep talking because that's not the kind of firm we are. There are legion firms, I think, who say they can do that. How are you going to take 20 meetings a week? Number one.
Right.
Number two, how good do you think those are going to be? Give me just a percentage of what you think is going to be good out of that 20 a week. And then you say you need, but how many clients do you really need? How many, to your point? And I think a lot of these, today I give credit. So many of these small and mid-sized firms that they know that. I think those are outliers that want the crazy volume and I hope, but it is such a good point is that when you look at it from that perspective, and numbers are important, but you're right. You don't need 5,000 in your database out of the gate and just blasting away at them because they're probably going to be all over the place in terms of verticals. Your messaging is not going to resonate, to your point. It looks like you've done no homework. It's a waste of time, everyone's time. But instead, and that's what we'll go after about 80 prospects at RSW a month because we can personalize the outreach, but it's still a healthy number. It's not, we're not just going after like 10 a month, but baby steps. I always talk about that in our content, for small and mid-sized agencies who are struggling, maybe they want to restart or they're kind of starting, they've come off all these referrals, which are great, but they know they've got to have some kind of an engine to back when those aren't coming in maybe as often. And it's like, you don't have to start with a giant number, target and focus. And then that way you're not having to do the giant email blast all the time because you can have that focus.
Right. And I think that a lot of times agencies have these expectations of volume set by pitches that they get from lead gen firms that are not thinking about it the same way that you and I are. And so they're coming in and they're saying, hey, I can get you, 10 appointments a week or whatever. And so now they've got it stuck in their head that this is what I should be doing. Or perhaps they're watching and there's a bunch of YouTube videos out there from some so-called agency gurus who talk about the importance of just getting tons and tons of calls set up.
That's interesting.
That is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Like it is just, I mean, most of you listening to this could not handle even one new client a month.
Right.
I mean, because think about it. The way that most agencies work, the onboarding process would be prohibitive for any agency under, say, 25 or 30 people. Again, the bread and butter of the listenership here. Yep. So don't go out there trying to think about this as a volume play. Think about this as quality. And so to sort of bring it back to where we started, if you're thinking about building quality relationships, you can really do that effectively with content if you're using it smartly, if you're investing the time to create the right content and deliver it to the right people at the right time. So that would really be my key takeaway for this. Think about the content, use it smarter. Don't overinvest in the wrong stuff. Don't create stuff that just gathers dust. Actually use it.
Yeah, that's amazing and succinct. And the only other thing I would add to that is also with content in terms of volume. You don't need that one example I gave where that one principal was posting 3 or 4 times a day on LinkedIn. That's awesome, but you don't have to do that to be effective, because I'm sure some folks, when I said that earlier, might be thinking, oh my God.
Right. And you got to do what's right for you. I mean, we talk about this all the time. You need to invest in the business development tactics that work for you, that you enjoy doing, that you will do consistently, that you can do well. And maybe that's content, maybe it's emails, whatever, but just do it smartly.
Yeah.
And you'll be in much better shape than if you're just following someone else's playbook and working at a crazy volume play.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
So with that, that's going to bring to an end this episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. Lima Nightmare, where can people find you? We need to get you reserved as Lima Nightmare on Twitter or something like that, so people can actually find you there.
And I need T-shirts. I know that.
T-shirts would be great.
I love it.
Where can they actually find you?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the site, rswus.com, and that's where all the content lies. And our YouTube channel, you'll find on there as well. We post all the videos that go straight to there. And we do 3 takeaways every other week, which is all based on business development. We started up on our sister company, RSW Agency Search. Our president, Mark Snyder, is interviewing marketers every week. And there's a lot, while that's for marketers, so much of it is agency related that we're going to post it on RSW too, because agencies don't get to hear, other than their clients, their prospects aren't always that profuse, or going to some of the topics that we go into. So we're on our 5th episode. It's been pretty well received. I think it's been helpful for agencies. So it's all on that site.
Excellent. And if you want to see a replay of this episode or any of the previous episodes, any of your podcasts, videos, all kind of stuff, just go to smallagency.tv and you get the full archive of videos there. If you want to get additional information about Saga, you can visit smallagencygrowth.com. And so with that brings us to an end of the, and see, now you got 2 props this week. What is this second prop here? I can't really see.
Elvis coffee cup.
Elvis.
I'm an Elvis fan.
So, and Elvis will now leave the building. We'll wrap up this episode. And I hope to see you all back here next week. And Lee, I hope to see you back here real soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Chip. Love it.